The latest MacBook Pro retains the same all-aluminum design, and being in my opinion the best designed laptop ever, that's definitely not a bad thing. As before, the Touch ID button is still a physical one serving as a power and shutdown button. The touch bar hasn't changed, so if you want to know more, check out our long-term touch bar review by clicking the card above. There are two main configurations of the 15-inch MacBook Pro. We covered the base model in a previous video, so in this one we're going to focus specifically on the top spec i9 model, and our main focus will be on performance, but I will take a quick look at a few updates before we dive really deep into performance and numbers. This latest model has a new butterfly keyboard featuring a silicone barrier beneath each key that makes typing a bit quieter than before and may fix keyboard issues some users have faced. The speakers have been updated and they sound much more full with noticeably more bass. The new MacBook Pros now feature Apple's T2 chip straight from the iMac Pro, taking care of a bunch of system controls like the SSDs, fans, FaceTime camera, which takes a load off the CPU, as well as file vault encryption without having any effect on SSD performance. The RAM has been updated to DDR4, and for an additional $400, you can upgrade from 16GB to 32GB of RAM, the amount in our review machine. The 16GB limitation was a frequent complaint from many content creators in the past, and we're glad Apple made the change to the more power-hungry DDR4, and with the increased battery capacity by 10%, maintaining that 10-hour rating. If you're not sure if you need the upgrade, you probably don't, but if you're looking to keep the machine for a long time or you do heavy tasks such as video editing, we would definitely recommend it. Our model's i9 CPU has a base clock speed of 2.9 GHz and a maximum boost clock of 4.8 GHz. Geekbench 4 results for this i9 MacBook Pro are an impressive improvement from the top spec 2017 model. Geekbench tests a wide variety of processing tasks, most of which don't max out your CPU, allowing the i9 to run at impressive clock speeds. For tasks like video editing, Cinebench R15, a rendering benchmark, is much more conclusive. Here, we saw an average of 30% higher scores with our i9 MacBook Pro over last year's best. The 2018 models have similar graphics as the 17s, but with an X added onto the end, meaning they are improvements on the same chips instead of new graphics. The good news is that the base graphics now ship with 4GB of memory, which will make a difference if you use your machine for media creation, especially connected to a high-resolution display. The OpenCL graphics test in Geekbench 4 gave us a fair improvement with the added X. The metal render showed an even bigger difference than the previous models. These benchmarks are impressive, but how do these scores add up to real-world use? To find out, we ran a series of video editing tests starting with Bruce X in Final Cut Pro. This 5K render tasks mainly the graphics, and our top spec 2018 MacBook Pro was only 2 seconds faster. Next, we rendered a 5-minute 4K project with effects that taxes the CPU and GPU more evenly, but doesn't max out either one. Our top spec 2018 model was 9% faster. Taking this a step further, we wanted to see how this machine fares under the most difficult loads, which will max out both the graphics and the CPU. That's 4.5K red raw footage with effects. Our 5-minute project rendered 18% faster with the new i9 model. I'm glad I decided to run our last test, another 5-minute 4K project with effects, but this time using HEVC footage and exporting to HEVC. Apple requires use of this more efficient codec if you want to shoot 4K 60 or 1080p 240 on your iPhone. This time, the i9 was more than twice as fast. Now this difference isn't just because of faster performance, but mostly because of the more efficient HEVC encoding and decoding hardware in the 8th gen Intel CPUs. Finishing off with Photoshop and Lightroom, the latest 15-inch MacBook was only 4% faster converting 50 edited RAW photos to JPEG, and we saw no smoothness differences when using these programs. Just like with Apple's latest mobile devices, True Tone is now available in a MacBook. Taking input from a pair of sensors on the screen, the display will account for the lighting conditions in the room. I ended up turning this off since I need a consistent white balance for color correction, but it's nice to have if you don't. The 15-inch MacBook Pro is a hot machine. And while it is pretty great, that's not the hot that we're referring to. It runs warm in every regard. We've said it before, we think Apple got hosed by Intel. In 2015, when this body style was being designed, Intel was promising 10nm core chips well before now, and even smaller chips by 2018. The CPU in this machine is still 14 nanometers. If Intel did meet its deadlines, we would have had a much cooler running CPU. This, plus DDR4 RAM, plus the 560X GPU, coupled with a thin design, still leads to a machine that isn't quite what it could be. Apple's July 24th patch did lower the heat output and stabilize clock speeds, but if you're pushing both the CPU and the graphics card to their limits, the CPU will still run below its base rated clock speed. I'll keep talk about the dongle life short. 2 years on, users are still complaining about those dongles. In the user's defense, they're not entirely wrong, but the further we get from release, the less valid the complaints are. USB-C to whatever connections are cheap and plentiful, and so are Thunderbolt 3 docks and eGPU enclosures that offer a myriad of additional ports. In my opinion, it's better to stop complaining about this, buy a few new cheap cables, and start enjoying having a single connection that works with whatever, instead of having a bunch of connections like we did in the past. The MacBook Pro is a workhorse, but it is not a desktop. If you're doing long runs of rendering or the like, the 5K iMac or iMac Pro will work better for you. That said, if you need portability, the MacBook Pro is the way to go, and thanks to the new Blackmagic eGPU, it could be a good alternative if your application will properly support it. We still have a lot of testing to do before we release our eGPU review, so for those interested, make sure to subscribe. The i9 MacBook Pro is a solid machine, one that is faster than literally every other MacBook Pro ever made. Now, if the performance improvements are worth upgrading to from a previous model really depends on your use task, how hard you push the machine, and how valuable the time saved is to you. For those of you deciding between purchasing a discounted top-spec 2017 MacBook Pro or this new Mac, to us, the 2018 15-inch MacBook Pro is a no-brainer. If you enjoyed this video, like it and hit that subscribe button. Also, check out our price guide, which makes it extremely easy to find the best deals on Apple products, updated daily. Be sure to follow us on social media, and we'll see you in the next video.